This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge, your favorite go-to podcast about the weather. I'm WeatherWorks meteorologist Mike Mahalik, and we come to you from our headquarters right here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. My co-host Brad is not with me here today, so I am riding solo. So you might see some differences because of that. Maybe you don't get some of Brad's quirky little sayings, but I'm still here. I still have a guest, and we'll be chatting about the tropics and the above normal Atlantic sea surface temperatures, especially around Florida. They've been running very hot as of late. And also, what does this mean for the rest of hurricane season, especially as we continue to transition to El Nino? So sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. We'll have our guest on right after this break.
Hey everybody, well, how many times have you been burned by a weather forecast? Well, probably a few, and it might have cost your business thousands. WeatherWorks is different. We have over 30 meteorologists to give you forecasts, notifications, and weather advice 24/7. Now that could certainly help when it comes down to making those crucial decisions, but there are even more products than that in which WeatherWorks offers, from weather data to historical reports. Call us at 908-850-8600 or visit us on the web at weatherworksinc.com. And oh, don't forget, when you think weather, think WeatherWorks.
Hello and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. Again, we're talking about these crazy above normal sea surface temperatures we're seeing in the North Atlantic Basin and what that means for hurricane season. And my guest today will be meteorologist Steve Copertino. He's here back since 2001. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah. Joined back in 2001. Been focusing mainly on tropic stuff, a lot of hazard mitigation, all that fun stuff. But yeah, great to be back. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to talking about some tropics.
Yeah, I want to say the tropics are one of your, I should say, specialties of some sort, I believe, from talking to you in the past.
Yeah. No, it's always been a interest of mine ever since I was little. So that's going all the way back since Floyd. But yeah, it's my obsession.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we all have certain storms that might trigger our interest in weather. I mean, mine were mostly winter storms. Maybe yours were mostly on the hurricane side. Um, but even big storms, even though mine were snowstorms, I would say that it still goes back to one of my first memories being like Hugo. I know this is dating me, but Hugo hitting the Carolinas, and then followed by Andrew a few years later. So that kind of stoked my interest more in the weather for sure. Um, so it's not only snowstorms that are interesting to me. There's a lot of weather phenomenon for sure. But Steve, I think let's get to the topic at hand here. Seeing some really high sea surface temperatures out there across the Atlantic Basin, especially around Florida. I mean, I'm seeing some temperatures that are in the 90s around the Keys. I that seems pretty out of this world, honestly.
Yeah, no, I mean it's been absurd. There have been some buoys off the Southwest Florida coast that have clocked in some temperatures around 100, which is just kind of hard to imagine. They're
100
challenging some,
degrees?
yeah. I mean, they're challenging some worldwide records. I believe that were set in like Kuwait or something like that back in the day. But um, it's funny. The good thing about that, there's good and bads. Obviously, the entire Gulf is on fire right now. They're running anywhere from 86 to about 88 degrees, well above normal for this time of year. But those very, very high readings near the Keys in Southwest Florida, um, they're shallow, which is good for now. They don't extend very, very far down, which if, God forbid, a system were to pass nearby, um, those temperatures would quickly be kind of washed away, and you'd have cooler water from down below kind of take over again. But yeah, the entire theme we've really seen over the last several months, basically since spring in the Atlantic, we started off warm. We ended the season warm last year. Towards the spring, we had a large negative NAO develop, which kind of reduces trade winds across the Atlantic. And it just really let those sea surface temperatures build. And they just kept building. Trade winds remained reduced. Um, I mean, even up to right about now. So we saw a large chunk from about just east of the Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles, all the way up to about Portugal, remain well above normal, 3-4 degrees Celsius in some cases, um, which would favor a rather active hurricane season. But we also have the caveat of this developing moderate strong Nino right now. So we're in some very interesting waters, no pun intended, right now that we
I
really
see what you
haven't
did.
probably seen. I got to get a Bradism in a little bit. So um,
Yeah.
probably haven't seen since like the late 1800s. So it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time.
Wow. I mean, you talk about the shallowness of the warmth and how that helps the situation because hurricanes can upwell the cooler water from beneath, churning the ocean up. And, I understand a lot of that. But what gets that water deeper? How does that warmth get deeper? Is it just time, or something else that is at work?
I mean, at least for there's the near the coast, the waters are a bit more shallow, so it's kind of harder to do that. Later on in the season, you can get it a little bit deeper, but the main area that you'd look for very deep, warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf would be the loop current there. That basically runs from the Caribbean all the way up into the Central Gulf. We've heard a lot of talk about that in recent hurricane seasons. It sparked rapid intensification for Hurricane Katrina, Rita, Michael, all the big names that you've heard of in the last decade or two. But that's the main area. And like I said, the entire Gulf's above normal. We're running where we should be for about September right now. So definitely something to keep an eye on. It's been very interesting. These constant heat waves, what we're seeing in Texas, what we've seen across Florida with heat indices in the 110 to 115 range, crazy stuff. It's just really kind of complicating the whole situation right now. So
Yeah, I mean, so obviously with the hot sea surface, we're providing a lot of fuel, for hurricanes because the hurricanes, for those of you out there, hurricanes basically need that warmth from the ocean water in order to fuel the storm to get larger and bigger and collect more moisture and so on. Big process that goes on there. It's like a big heat engine, basically, is
yes,
what we like
exactly.
to, um, compare it to. Um, so right away, you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to have these giant storms developing. But one limiting factor, like you said, is that shallow warmth. But another limiting factor could be something to do with the winds across the tropics. So I know, or many of you may know, that um, hurricanes need basically weak shear. We don't want a lot of shear. And what I mean by shear is that uh, speed with height. Basically, you're changing speed with height. You're getting faster aloft. If that happens, it blows the thunderstorm tops, off the eye of the hurricane, and just doesn't allow the storm to develop as well as it should. So, what are we seeing? Are we seeing a lot of shear, little shear? What's happening? What's affecting it?
So right now, I mean, there's been a couple of fronts that have moved through, a couple of disturbances that had a shot to develop. We had some stuff early on in the season, but obviously it's very hard to get anything too strong early on in the season. Things are just too progressive. The environment in general is just not too favorable. A lot of shear, like you talked about. Um, so for the Gulf, you mainly want these systems from the deep tropics coming in. And like I said before, shear out in the deep tropics has been unusually low. We've seen two systems, Cape Verde type systems. These come from African easterly waves, which are just tropical waves that move across the entire basin. Um, these have been stronger than normal over the last couple of months, but there's been a very narrow stripe of strong shear um, that's extended from, again, from the islands all the way up to the North Atlantic. So even though those waves are strong, once they run into that shear, they get torn apart. They aren't able to make it to the Caribbean. They aren't able to make it to the Gulf. So nothing's really been able to take advantage of those very warm sea surface temperatures, thankfully, as this time. But as we do get deeper in the season, I mean, we're still relatively early. It's only early August right about now, so we still have about a month and a half before we're in the peak. But as we roll on into the rest of the season, I would expect that shear to kind of relax and move off north. So we should see those tropical waves continue to move westward with time, develop, and potentially get into some of those areas that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I know, shear has a big part of it. So it's low right now, or you said it's high right now. It's kind of tearing apart the storms. But there's some other things that can affect the storms too. And one of them people might not even think about is the Saharan dust, correct?
Yes, correct. That has been a big deal over the last couple of years. I mean, it's interesting. As of right now, the Saharan dust has been below average. Winds over Africa have not really been able to. They haven't been strong. You can't really get that strong wind blowing over the Sahara and ejecting that dust into the Atlantic Ocean. And things have also been a bit more moist than normal, so it just kind of suppresses it as well. But basically, what that dust does, it gets into a tropical wave or a tropical storm, what have you, and it kind of just chokes off the storm. It causes thunderstorms to collapse, and with no thunderstorms, you can't strengthen a circulation, and just stuff really doesn't develop. And even if you do have a storm develop and you get that dry air to work its way in, once it runs into that shear we were talking about, it just makes it so much easier for it to fall apart. And that's kind of what we've been seeing so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's not just that warm water that it has the effects. Even though that's a good indicator when we're doing long range forecasts about what the season will be like, there's so many other things that go into whether or not we're going to have a below average number of storms, above average, whatever it may be. So it's interesting. I mean, Saharan dust is one of those things that I feel like I came across a little bit later in my career as a meteorologist. Not something you heard much about when I was younger.
Yeah, there's been a lot more studies being done on it. I'd say over the last 15 years or so. Everyone just used to call it dry air, but it's basically there were a bunch of studies going on. It's literally dust. It's dust particles. We've seen it blow all the way across the Atlantic into Florida, into Texas sometimes, and people have seen, kind of the sunsets we've seen up here from the smoke, but down there, yeah, and
Yeah, by up here he means the Northeast, basically.
yes, in the Northeast, in the Northeast, unfortunately. But yeah, there are a ton of factors that go into it. We've also seen another thing that's been important. There are these rising phases and these sinking phases that go across the globe. Um, a lot recently, early June, we had a nice rising phase which promotes thunderstorm development, and we got two tropical storms out of that with the low shear and the warm Atlantic out to the east of the islands. But recently, we've seen more of a suppressive phase, which kind of keeps thunderstorms down and keeps things weak. We're kind of stuck in that right now, and coupled with the shear and just the general early nature of the climo for the season, things look to remain generally quiet for at least the next week or 10 days or so. It's going to be interesting to see how this season plays out. I know there's a lot of forecasts out there that are expecting, some crazy numbers, but we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how it plays out. I think anyone saying with certainty how this year's going to be playing out is, I don't know, kind of kidding themselves a little bit.
since we're on the forecast, we put out a forecast. WeatherWorks here. We put out a forecast earlier this year. Believe it was sometime in May, where we had a total named storms of 10 to 14. The historical average is around 14. We had 3 to 7 hurricanes. The historical average is around 7, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes, and the historical average is 3. So we basically were kind of near normal, leaning a little bit below normal in that aspect. Um, I'm not sure how many named storms we have so far. I don't know if you have that off the top of your head, but I know there's been a few. You mentioned a few earlier in the season.
Yeah, we're actually on the D name right now, so that's our fourth storm, and there was one unnamed storm before that, so technically five. So
Okay, so we're heading into August. It seems like we're pretty much on par with our forecast. We had 2 to 3 named storms in June and July. We just got into August here, and we're at about 4. So it seems like we're kind of on target. Where are we going from here? Are we going to still be on that target? Are we favoring the lower side, the higher side? What do you think here, Steve?
I think it's all really going to depend on how we see things evolve by the middle of August. If we head into the middle of August and there really isn't much of a signal for things to really pick up, then we're probably going to end up right around normal. I could see us. There's a different metric to kind of measure the activity in a season that's called accumulated cycle and energy, or ACE for short. Basically, just um, the longer a storm survives, the more points, the stronger it is, the more points you get. If we're favoring more of a trek from the deep tropics out into the open Atlantic, shear is probably going to be higher than normal in the Caribbean and possibly the Gulf as well, given the El Nino conditions. But like I said, once we get into about mid-August, I expect things to pick up. If they don't really pick up, then this should be a shorter season. El Nino seasons typically shut down late September, early October, so that's when shear would really start to kick in. But it's going to be interesting. If we see a quick burst of activity, then that's kind of um, a harbinger of potentially a more active season. Might head into above normal, but I don't think it's going to be anything too horrible, hopefully. But we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, it wouldn't seem to be that way, especially since you now brought up the El Nino, which we haven't talked about a lot yet, which is coming on to a pretty robust El Nino event. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It slowed recently with this development. There were some early indications that it might come on really strong and reach a super Nino status, which is something we saw back in 2015, 2016. That would essentially just shut down the season immediately with all the shear and dry air and just a ton of unfavorable conditions. But it's been very steadily progressing over the last several weeks. I believe we're in solid moderate territory right now. Um, Again, it should continue maturing throughout the rest of the hurricane season here. And by the time we get into the fall, it should be right around its peak. So, um, not not only hurricane considerations, but we'll start be getting into some winter considerations as well by then.
It's always amazing to me how something that's happening somewhere else in the globe can affect some the other side of the globe, basically. So you have the El Nino happening in the equatorial Pacific, but it has a profound effect on the Atlantic Ocean tropical activity, because of all the shear it creates, which I always uh, find amazing that it can do something like that. But it's just I don't know. It's kind of mind blowing. I'm trying to find a word of how that can impact things, and even the placement of it can have different effects. Whether it's an east based thing closer to South America and Central America, or it's more in the middle of the Pacific, out towards the date line. That can have profound impacts on the winter too. Um, I don't know if you have any inkling. I can't say this word right now.
It's
Inkling
all good. It's all
on
good. We know what you mean.
on what the winter might be holding here because of that. Um, I'm hearing thing maybe not so much east based is what I'm kind of hearing.
I know we have our meteorologist Kyle Leahy, who has talked about that in the past. But yeah, I mean, going back to what you said, the Nino stuff, the way I look at it is like throwing or just teleconnections in general. Just you look somewhere else in the world for what might happen here on the East Coast. It's like throwing a pebble in a stream, and then you'll have ripples that work all the way down, and you can kind of hopefully do your best guess to predict what might happen. But with the Nino right now, it's very concentrated near the coast of South America. With time, you'd expect that to kind of slosh over to the west, more so towards Hawaii and the international date line. Um, if that happens, we could be in for an interesting winter. It's obviously too far out to tell right now. There are some models, there are some indications that things could be um, interesting. I'll put it at that for now as a little, teaser. But something that we've also seen with these sea surface temperatures that might make the forecast a little bit more complex. Recently, right off the coast of New England and just south of like Newfoundland, that area, sea surface temperatures have absolutely shot up about 5 degrees Celsius in the last month. There's been a persistent area of ridging or blocking, high pressure, what have you. That's just kind of kept those. It almost have a feedback loop at this point. The warm waters support higher heights, so we have some blocking, and blocking should sound familiar for winter forecasts because that's what we kind of look for an active pattern in the winter. So we'll have to see if that sticks around later into the year and then potentially in the winter.
I don't know if anybody's reading between the lines right now, but I know where Steve's going with this.
I'm trying to dance around it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no, you're not dancing around it with me. I hear what you're saying. I'm picking up what you're putting down. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a lot more detail on that coming up. Actually, relatively soon here in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be having our first in the series of three winter previews that we develop. And basically, that first winter preview will be laying the groundwork of what we're looking at, and kind of like what Steve was talking about here. Talking about what's going on with El Nino, what the North Atlantic waters are doing. Um, you know those type of big major pattern drivers is what we like to talk about, um, and then try to come up with a semblance of what that pattern overall might look like for the season. So that'll be our first of the winter previews, so you'll be seeing more about that in a couple of weeks if I could tease that a little bit more. um, um, but yeah, it's crazy that that's already coming up. I feel like just the other day, winter ended, and we got into the spring months, got into the green season. All of our clients, getting going with their landscaping jobs and lawn care jobs and paving and roofing and everything else. And now here we're already talking about winter.
It's crazy. Goes
Um,
fast. It goes
but
fast.
um, but it's interesting that you talked about the waters off the coast of New England warming up. Do you see that causing an issue if we do get a storm to develop? That it doesn't, because typically they like to weaken as it heads towards the northeast. They usually recurve out to sea, but if it has a more inland track, if the waters are warmer, it doesn't really weaken as much with the cool northeast waters, how they usually are cool, I should say. Now they're warmer. So, any impacts in that aspect you see?
Um, I think there are a few. Like I said, the high pressure or ridging near Newfoundland might uh, support more of a pattern for storms. It's going to be tricky. We need storms to develop in the right place. If we were seeing a lot of storms develop more so in the Caribbean, we've seen a large trough or areas of low pressure kind of swing through the Ohio Valley and Northeast. If that were continuing, we were seeing storms more so in the Caribbean. Yeah, I would be pretty concerned because that pattern would kind of just suck them out of the Caribbean and kind of into the Northeast. But as we head deeper into the season, it's certainly something to keep an eye out. I would favor the East Coast, and like you said, I sea surface temperatures. Basically from the east coast of Florida all the way up to the Gulf Stream at about 40 north are running 2 to 3 degrees above normal. So it potentially, yeah, it could help a storm hold on to a stronger strength. Yeah, all the way to the coast if God forbid that were to happen. But certainly something to keep an eye on. It's just another potential. These warm waters have such an impact, basically, that there's just so many things to be on guard about. And like we were saying, we're favoring some long track storms. And unfortunately, with that, it gets a little bit complex. It depends on the pattern out to the west and how things are evolving. So, but we'll have a ton of, or hopefully a plenty of lead time and time to watch something if something were to develop like that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that at least for us in the Northeast, even though those waters are warm, and even though there's that potential that it could hold its strength a little bit greater than usual, that um, it's also been fairly troughy in the Northeast. So, like you said, if it's based a little bit further west over the Great Lakes, then maybe it can bring the storm up. But however, if it's more over the Northeast, that might kind of just recurve that storm out to sea. So we don't want to alarm anybody. But it is interesting that we do have that warmer than normal water there. Um, that could affect the storms a bit. And speaking of that, I wonder what the Jersey Shore water temperatures are. Do you happen to know that off the top of your head? Because, man, it'd be nice to hit a little beach trip here.
I mean, I can tell you, I went down to a seaside not too long ago. They were a little chilly going in,
Oh,
but
wow.
I mean, once you got used to it, it really wasn't that bad. Let's just take a quick look
It's
here.
what it's crazy to me that those water temperatures are in the 90s down in South
Yeah,
Florida.
yeah.
Because typically, if you go to the New Jersey shoreline, you're lucky if you're hitting 70 degrees.
Oh
It
yeah.
seems
Oh
like.
yeah. No.
Every time I've gone down, it's been so cold in there. Even most recently, I think it was a year or so ago, I went down and my daughter was collecting seashells the whole time in the ocean, and I'm like, how are you alive? Like, I would have came out shivering a long time ago, but she was really persistent about it.
So I mean, basically from Cape May to about Wildwood, it's low mid 70s ish. But once you get near like the inland or the inlet areas, I mean, you're pushing some mid 70s in
Wow.
spots, maybe even a little bit warmer. So um, it's warm. I mean, everyone in the Northeast knows we've had a very very warm couple of weeks here, very humid. So that adds to it. But yeah, yeah, it's been a warm one so far, so we'll see how things go. Hopefully, we get a little bit of a break now. I know we're in one right now, but see if it
Yeah.
lasts.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we don't get a tropical system entering the Gulf anytime soon
No,
because
no.
especially with the troughiness that we're seeing over the Great Lakes, that will certainly um, tend to bring that storm a little bit further north rather than it, heading south or dissipating. So I really, really don't want to get a storm in there right
Yeah, no.
now.
I mean, the Gulf has had enough in the last since 2017. They've had a number of storms impact the Gulf Coast. We had
Right.
Harvey, Laura, Ida, Michael, Ian last year. It would be everyone would be fine if we just took a break from that for a
Yeah,
couple of years. So
yeah. I like you said before, it's just torching down there, so I would not want a storm getting in there. One last thing I was thinking about too, um, with the trophiness, is there potential for that development a little bit closer to home rather than coming off of Africa, watching a wave long track? Are we going to get a front that stalls out as it moves through the southeast and just basically stalls out as we get into the Gulf? I guess that would be a concern of mine, but I don't know. Um, you're looking at that more than I am. I'm more in the 5-day forecast realm up in New England and not really um, broad pattern.
that's a great question. Yeah, I would say that's something to certainly keep an eye on. A lot of that goes or flies kind of under the radar just because people are so concerned with what's happening out in the deep tropics. But yeah, you get a front hung up off the southeast coast or a stalled front in the Gulf. Um, give it time to kind of marinate, and with those sea surface temperatures, sometimes you get a low level circulation develop very quickly, some thunderstorms develop, and then in a day you can get a hurricane or a tropical storm. We've seen that a couple of times in the last several years. A good one was I believe it was Umberto back in 2007, I want to say. Just rapidly strengthened, no real model guidance or anything like that, and just something you have to keep an eye out for. And I mean, there are some indications that we might see a front get hung up off the southeast coast in the next week or so, but those things are very fickle. It's hard to pick out too far out in advance. But
Thinking
yeah,
about lunch.
yeah, now pickles.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, there's lots of things to keep an eye on besides the typical tropical wave action. So definitely a good point.
Well, I suppose the pro to a situation like that is typically the storms don't have a whole lot of time to strengthen into major hurricanes or anything like that. I suppose the downside would then be is just the heavy rainfall that's associated with any type of tropical system.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you know,
those tend to be more of a rain threat, like you said. Usually don't get too strong. Maybe a couple get a little bit strong, more than a cat one, but the lead time is kind of the issue there too. So
So, Steve, we talked a lot about um, how the sea surface temperatures are affecting the hurricanes, but what other type of impacts could those high surface temperatures have? I'm thinking like wildlife, fish, stuff like that.
right. So one of the things that we also look at, I mean, not meteorologists, but
I know this is kind of not quite in the
yeah, this
meteorology
is kind of
realm.
getting off the weather. I mean, it's weather impacting other areas. But just a lot of the coral reef kind of barriers down in the Caribbean. Obviously, that's also an issue down in the southern hemisphere in Australia. But those very warm sea surface temperatures will bleach or kind of kill off the coral reefs, which are a large habitat home spot for a wide variety of sea life, which obviously is not a good thing. So these prolonged periods of extreme heat certainly not a great thing. And it's really kind of unfortunate to see play out. This isn't the first time we've seen above normal temperatures, but it's certainly the first time in a while we've seen extremely above normal temperatures like this.
Well, there's your ecological corner of the discussion. Even though we're meteorologists, we still keep in tune with some of those other impacts that could happen. But I think, Steve, let's just wrap it up for everybody real quick. Let's talk. Let's just what are we looking here for the rest of the season in the tropics? We talked about it a lot during the show, but let's just kind of put it in a nutshell if we can.
Right, right. So as of right now, I mean, things should stay quiet. Not really expecting a whole lot of deep tropical, strong storms over the next week or two. I'd say about mid-August or so. After that, there looks to be some changes. We should see shear relax a little bit. We're going to be starting to enter more of a climatologically favorable period. Um, should see stronger waves roll off of Africa, have a chance to develop. But the big wild card is going to be where they track. If they're tracking more off to the north and east of the islands, they have a better shot to get stronger and more have a potential threat to land down the road. But more of a track into the Caribbean might encounter some shear. But it's really going to depend on how things progress through the middle of the month. If we see a steady burst of activity through the middle of the month into September, we'll be headed towards a solidly above season. But if we just kind of have a few storms through mid to late August, then we're going to be pretty much on track for our forecast of right around average.
Right, and I think our forecast with the 10 to 14 named storms probably still holding with that, from what I'm hearing for the most part.
For the most part, I don't see anything too major to change at this point. Maybe up a couple of storms. You might get some random storms out in the North Atlantic, like we were talking about. Sea surface temperatures are warm everywhere, so you can get a couple hybrids that just kind of tack on some names. But in the general flow of things, it should wind up to be around an average, slightly above average year in spots. Again, favoring some long track storms. Depends, on the exact steering whether or not they pose a threat to land. But overall, reduced activity in the Caribbean, hopefully reduced activity in the Gulf. Might get some frontal boundary stuff, but again, hopefully it shouldn't be anything too crazy intense. More so rainmakers.
Right. Okay. And then, of course, we talked about the El Nino coming up as we head into the fall and winter. Well, it already is, but that should have an impact on the season where things shut down a little bit quicker than normally this year. Correct?
Exactly. Compared to a La Nina year, a La Nina year can pretty much go into late October, November. But with an El Nino, that shear really kicks up late September into early mid October. So if this year behaves like a typical Nino, we should see things cut off pretty quickly after our peak climatological point here in the middle of September.
Right. And that's pretty much reflected in our numbers that we shared with everybody earlier. We had an earlier blog about the summer and tropical forecast. You can find that at weatherworksinc.com if you'd like to read that original forecast. But we had a graphic in there that did have October, November only seeing about one or two named storms. So we were already keying then on the activity winding down a little bit quicker than normal.
And anything really during that time frame should Climo typically favors that to shift back towards the Caribbean and the Gulf. But the one caveat with that is by the time we get into that time period, shear is already getting high over the continental United States. So even if you did have something potentially developed down in the Caribbean, by the time it gets to the coast, it's going to be running into a lot of shear typically. So it's probably going to be losing steam. But again, we'll see how things play out.
All right, great. And of course, we're watching that warm water close to the coast. That could help storms keep intensity a little bit if we do have one that comes into landfall. So something that we are watching, but not necessarily thinking that this is a big red flag. Oh my gosh, we're going to have a major hurricane running into, Long Island or something like that. No,
Right.
we're not saying that. No. But we're just saying we need to watch that if we do have a storm that's developing and it tracks towards land, it might be able to hold its intensity a little bit longer.
Exactly. Just something to keep an eye on. Yeah, no reason for alarm right now. Just, monitor how things develop, and, we'll be sure to keep you guys updated if there really is something that we need to keep a lookout for.
Absolutely. And we'll always have information on our Facebook and Twitter pages. If we do have a storm that's causing some alarm in the community, we'll definitely have some information on that storm. And also in our blogs too at weatherworksinc.com once again. You can certainly find those. And of course, we'll have more information on the winter as we're going through August and heading into September. Our long range team is really starting to look at that stuff because we all know how important the winter is to a lot of people. But Steve, I really do appreciate you coming on the show here today. Thanks for all your information.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun. Always good to be back.
All right. Well, we'll have to have you on again, that's for sure. Maybe once we get closer to winter, maybe we could have a team of a few guys come in and talk about the winter season. I'm sure we will do a podcast about the winter outlook. You likely in late October, I would say. So don't expect a full winter outlook from us anytime soon, but we are getting the wheels turning on those forecasts, and I'm sure we're probably going to see a little bit more snow along the I-95 corridor in the Northeast compared to last year, at least.
I mean, that it would be hard to see less snow than
yeah,
last
it's
year.
2 years of meager snowfall, I don't think is in the cards. So there should be a little bit of an uptick if I want to put a little bit of tease in there, but
There's hope.
we don't. Yes, exactly, and we don't want to say too much at this point in time, but we'll have all that information later. But anyway, Steve, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.
So that is the Weather Lounge podcast for this week. Thank you for everybody for listening. Remember to rate our show. We want to see those high rankings to put us up there in the search queue when people are searching for weather podcasts, which, hey, this is the one you need to see or need to listen to, I should say. But also find WeatherWorks, our parent company, on any social media channels out there, Facebook, Twitter, what have you. And as always, visit weatherworksinc.com for the latest we have with WeatherWorks. So thanks again, and we'll see you again in another 2 weeks.